The Maryland Department of Health, Developmental Disabilities Administration, Self-Directed Services Training Series, Module 8, the Self-Directed Services Budget Sheet and Modification. Updated October 2024. This training module will provide you with an overview of the Self-Directed Services Budget Sheet and modifications. This training is a summary with important information on this topic. More information and requirements are found in the Medicaid program applications, laws, regulations, guidance, and policies. The most updated information regarding self-directed services is published in the Self-Directed Services Policy Manual that can be found on the DDA's website. Participants self-directing their services are allocated a specific budget of Medicaid waiver funding to use to hire employees, vendors, DDA providers, and to purchase services. The self-directed budget allocation means the DDA's authorization of funding for participants to manage their Medicaid waiver program services, including provider and vendor rates and employee wages. The cost of services and employee wages must be within the DDA's established reasonable and customary standards. Self-directed services budget allocation is based on the approved person-centered plan total cost noted within LTSS Maryland. LTSS Maryland is the DDA's electronic data. LTSS Maryland is the DDA's electronic data management system, developed and supported by the department. For DDA-operated programs, it is used to create, review, and maintain records about eligibility status for services and the participant's person-centered plan, services, and funding authorized by the DDA. The participant, with the support of their team, will develop the self-directed services budget sheet based on the services and units approved and authorized in the person-centered plan and budget allocation. Participants have employer authority over some Medicaid waiver services. This means that the participant can be the employer of the person that is providing those services. As the employer, the participant chooses how much the employee is paid, what benefits they receive, and what their expectations are for the employee. The participant hires, terminates, and supervises under employer authority. Under employer authority, the participant is required to follow all employment laws and is also required to pay employees within the DDA's established reasonable and customary standards. Participants have budget authority over all Medicaid waiver services that can be self-directed. This means that the participant chooses how much to pay for the service within reasonable and customary standards. For more information about self-directed waiver services, please refer to Training Module 4. Reasonable and customary rates for providers. Participants can hire DDA providers for certain services. DDA providers must meet service requirements. Participants are responsible for paying an agreed rate. These costs for provider services are paid from the participant's budget. Agreed rates must be within the DDA's established reasonable and customary standards. Participants can negotiate lower rates with providers. Providers are independent professionals or businesses. Providers are responsible for their employer-related responsibilities and costs. Participants do not have to allocate separate funding to pay for provider staff taxes and other related business expenses. Providers are paid a flat fee or rate. It is important to note that some self-directed Medicaid waiver services can only be provided by a DDA provider. Participants can increase the rate they pay providers within the DDA's reasonable and customary standards. Participants are not required to increase provider rates. Rate increases can be based on performance. Rate increases can be offered at any time during the year. Reasonable and customary rates for vendors. Participants self-directing their Medicaid waiver services can hire vendors for certain services. Vendors must meet service qualifications. Participants establish payment rates for vendors. Vendor rates must be within the DDA's established reasonable and customary standards. Participants are responsible for paying the agreed vendor rate. These costs come from the participant's budget. Participants can negotiate lower rates with vendors. Vendors are independent professionals or businesses. Vendors are responsible for their own taxes and business-related expenses. Participants do not have to allocate separate funding to pay for vendor staff taxes and other related business expenses. Vendors are paid a flat fee or rate. Can increase the rate they pay vendors within the DDA's established reasonable and customary rate standards for the Medicaid service that the vendor provides. Participants are not required to increase vendor rates. Rate increases can be based on performance, and rate increases can be offered at any time during the year. Reasonable and customary wages for employees. Participants self-directing their Medicaid waiver services can hire staff or employees for certain services. Participants self-directing their services can establish their own staff wages. This is a duty under the Self-Direction Employer Authority. Staff wages must be within the DDA's established reasonable and customary standards. Participants are responsible for employer-related costs. These costs come out of the participant's budget. Participants must ensure their budget can support all employer-related costs. Taxes are an employer-related cost. Participants can hire staff at the state's or, if higher, their county or local established minimum wage. Participants should hire enough staff to meet their needs. Participants should minimize the need for staff to work overtime. Overtime payment is often required by law when staff work more than 40 hours in a week. Overtime payments are an additional cost to the budget. Before approving overtime, participants must ensure they have funding and units available in their budget allocation. Participants can offer their staff a pay increase. Participants are not required to offer staff pay increases. Pay increases can be based on staff performance, and pay increases can be offered at any time during the year. Participants can submit a request to exceed the established wage range. The request is submitted using the Self-Directed Services Staff Wage Exception Form. This form is available on the DDA website. Personal Supports Enhanced and Community Development Services 2-to-1 and 1-to-1 staff supports are based on assessed need in the person-centered plan. Wages for 2-to-1 supports account for 2 employees at the same time. Total wages for 1 employee may not be higher than that maximum. Additional employee costs. For all employee taxes, the standard fee of 14% is used to cover all possible fringe expenses for employees. The rate of 14% is non-negotiable. Budget sheets must always include this 14%. Benefits must be budgeted each year based on the participant benefit policy. Examples include paid time off, health insurance, mileage, training, training hours, and holiday pay. For additional information regarding developing an employee handbook and policies, please see the Hiring and Managing Employees training module. The Coordinator of Community Services facilitates the completion of the Self-Directed Services budget sheet. The support broker should never complete the Self-Directed Services budget sheet for the participant. The Self-Directed Services budget sheet is meant to be completed by the participant with the Coordinator of Community Services. It is best practice that the budget sheet is completed in a meeting with every team member. The participant wants to be there, with all team members offering their feedback. Support brokers may offer input regarding certain aspects of the budget sheet based on their other conversations with the participant. In the next slide, we'll review those particular areas where support brokers and other team members may be useful. This slide includes a screenshot of the DDA Self-Directed Services budget sheet, which is located on the DDA website. The Self-Directed Services budget sheet is a document used for participants to indicate how they are using their self-directed budget allocation for Medicaid waiver service. It includes the participant's person-centered plan authorized services, the participant's selected financial management and counseling services provider, proposed employee rates and provider and vendor rates, and employee-related expenses such as taxes, benefits, and training when the participant hires their own employees. The budget sheet notes general information such as the participant's name, person-centered plan status such as type of person-centered plan or financial management and counseling services change, effective date, annual plan date, number of months left in the plan, number of weeks left in the plan, and Medicaid waiver program name. The Self-Directed Services budget sheet also includes text boxes to enter the DDA Self-Directed Services budget allocation. This budget sheet is dynamic. This means it will automatically calculate based on information entered. The Self-Directed Services budget sheet must not exceed the approved DDA budget allocation. As applicable, a box will turn red if you exceed the budget allocation. Unallocated funding may be accessed later using a budget modification form following DDA guidance. Yellow cells may be filled in, white cells are automatically calculated and cannot be manually filled in. Participants, with the support of their coordinators of community services, enter hours, rates, numbers of months or weeks, etc. in the yellow cells. Keyboard arrow keys can be used to move between cells. The Self-Directed Services budget sheet also includes a text box for participants to share any general notes that may be helpful for the team or their financial management and counseling services provider. It is important to check the DDA website to ensure that the current version of the budget sheet is being used. The DDA has a walkthrough video for participants to use when developing their Self-Directed Services budget sheet. It can be great practice for the team to watch this video before completing the budget sheet each year. Budget modifications. Participants, with the support of their team, may make changes to their Self-Directed Services budget sheet during the annual plan year. Changes to the self-directed services budget sheet are called budget modifications. Budget modifications can only be made if the budget remains within the total approved budget amount and if the modification is allowed by policy and guidance. Details about the self-directed services budget modifications can be found in the Self-Directed Services Manual. Slide shows some examples of when a budget modification would be completed. Budget modifications can serve to increase or decrease staff wages, vendor rates, or provider rates within the reasonable and customary standards. Add, delete, increase or decrease employer-related expenses associated with health benefits, paid time off, sick and safe leave, or transportation. And adjustment to funding associated with taxes. Teams must ensure enough funds remain in each wage tax line for services through the end of the plan year. Budget modifications can also serve to change the use of staff to a vendor or provider for the same type of service, for the same type and unit of services. Change the use of a vendor or provider to hiring a staff person for the same type of unit or services. Increase respite camp funding up to the waiver program service limit, currently set at $7,248 per plan year. Finally, budget modifications can also serve to move funding associated with ongoing job supports, community development services, support broker services, personal supports, and rehabilitation up to the approved number of hours per week. Or change individual and family directed goods and services within applicable limits. The DDA has a walkthrough video for participants to use when creating a budget modification. It can be great practice for the team to watch this video before creating a budget modification when needed. This slide contains resources related to this topic. Summary. The Self-Directed Services budget sheet is created based on the services and units approved in the participant's person-centered plan. Budget sheets are facilitated by the coordinator of community services with the participant alongside any team members the participant desires. Providers, vendors, and employees must be budgeted for and paid within the DDA's reasonable and customary wage and rate standards. Employer taxes and fringe cost must be budgeted at 14%. Budget modifications can be completed if there is funding available to move and there is an authorized listed action to complete. This ends Module 8.